My name is Maeve, and I was 34 the day my mother-in-law lifted a glass of white wine, looked at me across a backyard full of family, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made." It was her husband's 70th birthday party. There was a white tent and a caterer and 100 people on the lawn. My little girl was somewhere in that crowd in her good dress. And Gloria said that line the way she said everything sweet on top, with a blade underneath, and then she smiled and waited for me to shrink. And here's the thing you need to know about me, right up front. I had nothing to fight back with. No clever comeback. No proof of anything. I'm not that kind of woman. I'm the kind who can't find her own car keys, who loses every argument, who couldn't produce a receipt to save her life. Gloria had spent 15 years beating me at every game that has rules. So I just stood there and took it, the way I always had. Gloria was sure she'd won. She'd been winning against me for years. What she didn't know was that 5 minutes later, a quiet man who hadn't raised his voice in 50 years was going to stand up at that party and say the one thing she'd spent her whole life making sure nobody ever said out loud. Welcome to Composed Drama Stories, where the women everyone underestimated finally tell their side. If quiet strength and slow justice are your kind of evening, stay with me. Let me put you on that lawn, because I want you to feel how alone I was standing there. Gloria in her cream-colored dress, pearls, every hair in place. Her society friends a few feet away, pretending not to listen, but absolutely listening. My ex-husband Mark across the yard with his new girlfriend, finding something very interesting to look at on his phone, and me, in a dress I'd bought on sale, holding a paper plate of somebody else's potato salad, with my whole body going hot the way it does when you've been slapped in public and you're not allowed to cry. I didn't have a single thing to say. That's the truth. I opened my mouth, and nothing came. Because there's no good answer to a woman like Gloria. You can't out-talk her. I'd learned that the hard way over 15 years. So I just set down my plate, and I said, quietly, "Excuse me, Gloria. I should go check on Ruby." And I walked away. And she watched me go like a cat watching a bird get smaller, and I could feel her smiling at my back. But to understand why that line went all the way to the bone, and why, 5 minutes later, the whole lawn went so quiet, you could hear the ice melting in the drinks, you need to know who I was in that family. And you need to know what I gave them, before they decided I was something you could throw away. I married Mark Calloway when I was 22. I was a hairdresser. I still am. I've got a chair at a little salon 2 towns over, and I love it. The gossip and the warmth of it. The way people tell you their whole life while you've got your hands in their hair. I came from a loud, broke, happy family. My dad drove a delivery truck. My mom raised 5 of us in a house where the door was always open and there was always one more plate at the table. And then there were the Calloways. Old money, or at least old enough to act like it. A big white colonial outside Boston. A family name that meant something at the country club. Mark was the golden son, handsome and easy, and when he looked at me, I felt like the most interesting person in the world. The first time he brought me to that house, I knew I was out of my league before I even got through the door. I'd worn my nicest dress, and it was still wrong. There was a fork I didn't recognize. There were paintings of dead Calloways on the walls, all of them looking down their noses at me the same way Gloria did. I made a joke to break the tension, I'm a joke, when Nervous Person and Mark's family gave me these polite, pitying smiles, and Gloria said, "Isn't she funny?" in a tone that meant the opposite. I went home and cried and told Dee I'd embarrassed myself, and Dee said, "Or they're just cold and you're warm and they don't know what to do with you." She was right. She's usually right. It just took me 15 years to believe her. His mother, Gloria, took one look at me and saw exactly what I was. A hairdresser. A nobody from a nobody family. Mark's little adventure, she called me once, early on, smiling, like I was a phase he'd grow out of. But here's what Gloria never understood about people, and it's the whole reason this story turns out the way it does. She thought the only currency that mattered was the kind you can count. Money, status, the right last name. She never once understood the other kind, the kind I happened to be rich in. Because I won that family. Not with money, God knows I didn't have any. I won them with the only things I've ever been good at. Showing up, remembering, caring out loud. I was the one who remembered every birthday. I was the one who learned that Mark's quiet father, Sal, took his coffee with exactly a half spoon of sugar and liked to be asked about his garden. I was the one who hosted Thanksgiving, when Gloria decided it was too much and made it warm instead of frozen, the way her dinners always were. I was the one the nieces and nephews ran to. I was the one who, when anybody in that family was actually hurting, was the first person they called. Not Gloria. Me, let me give you a picture of what that looked like, because the small things are the whole story. The first Thanksgiving I hosted, Gloria's dinners had always been these stiff, silent affairs assigned seats. The good china, everybody afraid to laugh too loud. So I did it my way. I put music on. I let the kids make hand turkeys and taped them to the wall. I had everyone go around and say one good thing about the person on their left, and Mark's stern uncle teared up. And Gloria sat at the end of the table, looking like someone had served her a dish she didn't order. That was the day I understood her. She didn't dislike me because I was beneath the family. She disliked me because the family was warmer with me in it, and that warmth was something she'd never been able to make, and couldn't stand that I made it for free. There was Mark's niece, Hannah, who was 12 and miserable the year her parents split. And Gloria's solution was to tell her to keep her chin up. Mine was to teach her to braid. The two of us on the porch for a whole summer, and that girl told me things she never told a soul. There was the nephew who came out to me first, at 16, in my kitchen, because he knew I'd just hug him and pour him another root beer, which I did. I wasn't trying to win anyone. I just loved them. That's the only move I have ever known. It happens to be a good one, but I never thought of it as a move. Gloria did, though. Gloria saw everything as a move. That was always the difference between us. And I want to tell you about Sal, Gloria's husband, Mark's father, because Sal is the heart of all of this. Sal Calloway was a quiet man. 50 years married to Gloria had taught him that the easiest path through any room was a quiet one. He'd built the family business and then handed the talking over to his wife. And mostly just receded. He'd sit at the end of the table at those frozen dinners. And nobody really talked to him. And I noticed that. From the very first holiday, I noticed it. So I talked to him. I asked about his tomatoes and his old Navy days and the dog he'd had as a boy. And this quiet man slowly lit up around me, like I was the first person in years who'd actually pulled up a chair. He used to say I was the daughter he never had. He'd say it low, so Gloria wouldn't hear, and pat my hand. And then, 2 years into my story, something happened that I need you to hold on to, because it's the thing that comes back around at the end. Sal had a heart attack. A bad one. The kind where the family stands in the hospital hallway and a doctor uses careful words. He survived it, but barely, and afterward he needed months of care, real care. the unglamorous kind. Help getting to the bathroom, help with his pills. Someone to drive him to cardiac rehab 3 times a week and sit in the waiting room. Someone to be there in the long, scary afternoons when an old man who almost died is afraid to be alone. And here is the part I will never forget, the part that explains everything. Gloria couldn't do it. I don't mean she couldn't physically. I mean she wouldn't. She found reasons. The sight of him weak upset her. She wasn't a nurse. She had her committees, her trips, her standing hair appointment. About 3 weeks in, she announced she was going to stay at her sister's for a while because the house was too sad. And she left. She left her own husband 3 weeks out from nearly dying, alone in that big white house. So I moved in. For 4 months. Me, the hairdresser, the little adventure. I left my own apartment and I slept in the Calloway's guest room, and I took care of Sal. I learned his medications. I made his low-salt meals and pretended they were delicious so he'd eat. I drove him to every rehab appointment. I sat with him in the bad afternoons and held his hand and told him stories until he wasn't scared anymore. I bathed that proud old man when he couldn't do it himself. And I did it in a way that let him keep his dignity. Because that's the only way I know how to do anything. Let me tell you about those afternoons, because that's where Sal and I became what we became. There's a particular kind of fear that lives in a man who has just learned his heart can quit on him. It comes in the quiet hours, around 3 or 4, when the light goes long and there's nothing to distract you from the sound of your own chest. Sal would get this look far away, frightened, and I learned to recognize it. And I just pull a chair up next to his and start talking. About anything. His tomatoes. The Navy, the dog he had as a boy, a mutt named Champ that he must have told me about 40 times, and I let him tell me 40 times, because the telling kept the fear away. Some afternoons he'd cry, this dignified old man, embarrassed, and I'd just hold his hand and say, "I've got you, Sal. You're not alone. I've got you." And he'd squeeze my hand back like it was the only solid thing in the room. There was one night his blood pressure dropped, and he got scared and called out. And I came running in my pajamas at 2 a.m, and I sat on the edge of his bed, and we counted his breaths together until they slowed down. In and out. Until he could sleep. I never told anyone that. There was nobody to tell, because the one person who should have been on the other side of that bed was at her sister's, because the house was too sad. Gloria came home when he was better, when the hard part was over and he was presentable again. And do you know what she said to me when she walked back into that house? She looked around at the clean kitchen and her recovered husband, and she said, "Well, I'm glad somebody had the time. I'm glad somebody had the time." I didn't say anything. I never said anything. That was always my problem, and my whole personality rolled into one. I just smiled and went back to fixing the world quietly, because I genuinely believed that if I loved these people enough, one day it would be enough. One day Gloria would see me. She never saw me. She just saw someone useful. And there's a big, painful difference between those two things, and it took me losing everything to finally learn it. Now let me tell you how they threw me away. Because that's the part that still takes my breath, even now. For years, the marriage was good. Or I thought it was. Mark and I had Ruby, and she was the light of all our lives, especially Sal's. That little girl could make the quiet man laugh like nothing else on earth. The two of them had a thing where Ruby would do his hair with about 40 plastic clips, and Sal would sit there, this dignified 70-year-old, covered in pink butterfly barrettes, perfectly content, because his granddaughter was happy. After the heart attack, when he was scared and low, it was Ruby's visits that did what no medicine could. She'd climb up next to him and tell him long, nonsensical stories about her stuffed animals. And I'd watch the fear leave his face just because a small person loved him without conditions. So when I tell you that the divorce didn't just take a wife away from that family, it took a granddaughter's easy presence too. Cut down to a custody schedule, I want you to understand that Sal lost more than he ever said. He lost his nurse and his friend and half his time with the one person who made him laugh. All because his wife decided I was beneath them. And she was the glue. I kept hosting and remembering and showing up. I thought I was building a family. I thought I was finally, slowly, becoming a Calloway. But the whole time, Gloria was working on her son. Drip by drip. Year by year. I didn't see it because I'm not a suspicious person. That's another thing about me. I take people at face value, which is a beautiful way to live and a terrible way to survive a woman like Gloria. I only pieced it together later. How she'd plant little things in Mark's ear. Don't you ever wonder what your life could have been? You married so young, Mark. A man in your position. How she'd compare me, gently to the daughters of her friends, the lawyers. The ones with the right degrees. How she made sure Mark always felt, just a little, that he'd reached below himself when he married the hairdresser. How she introduced him, more than once, to the freshly divorced daughter of one of her club friends. A woman named Brittany. It was so slow I couldn't see it happening, and that's the genius of how Gloria worked. She never said one big terrible thing I could point to. It was 1,000 small ones, spread over years. A look when I laughed too loud at a dinner party, a bless her heart when I mentioned my job. A way of saying the salon like it was a place people went to be sad. She'd compliment me in a way that was really an insult to leave under the table, for later, Maeve has such a knack for making people comfortable. Not everyone needs to be ambitious, and Mark absorbed all of it, the way a son absorbs his mother's voice without even knowing it's gone inside him. By the end, he wasn't hearing me anymore. He was hearing her, played back in his own head, telling him he could do better. And Mark weak, easy, golden Mark, who had never in his life had to choose between his mother and anyone, Mark started to believe her. Started needing space. Started telling me I'd let myself go. That we'd grown apart. All the lines a man uses when his mother has been redecorating the inside of his head for 15 years. The night he told me he was leaving, he couldn't even look at me. He looked at a spot over my shoulder, and he said the words his mother had been writing for years, and I stood in the kitchen I'd made warm 100 times and felt the floor of my whole life give way. He left me 18 months ago. He moved out, moved on to Brittany almost immediately, and the divorce was fast and cold. And the worst part wasn't even Mark. The worst part was that the entire family followed Gloria's lead. Because Gloria controlled the story. She always controlled the story. By the time she was done, the version going around was that poor Mark had finally freed himself from his grasping little hairdresser wife. And wasn't it all for the best? Aunts who'd hugged me at Christmas went cool. Cousins stopped texting. 15 years of love, and Gloria rewrote it into a cautionary tale in about a month, because she held the pen, and I never had. And I couldn't fight it. That's what I need you to understand. I had no proof of anything Gloria had done. You can't photograph a whisper. You can't keep the receipt on 15 years of a woman poisoning a well, one drop at a time. I knew what she'd done. I knew it in my bones. But knowing isn't proof. And I have never in my life been the kind of woman who could lay out a case. I'm the kind who loses the argument and cries in the car afterward, thinking of what I should have said. So I lost. I lost the marriage. I lost the family I'd spent 15 years loving. And I lost my place at every table I'd ever set. I got Ruby half the time, and a polite distance from everyone else. Gloria had won. Completely, the way she always won on the field where she was strong and I was nothing. And I want to be honest about how far down I went, because the soft ones don't always look like they're drowning. And we are. For months after the divorce, I'd get Ruby to bed, and then I'd sit on my kitchen floor, not even crying, just sitting replaying 15 years and trying to find the moment I should have fought harder. There wasn't one. That was the worst part. There was no single battle I'd lost. I'd lost a war I never even knew I was in, against a general who'd been planning it since the day I walked through the door. I started doubting the only thing I'd ever been sure of about myself, that loving people was worth something. Because look where it had gotten me. Maybe Gloria was right. Maybe warmth really was just a thing for people who weren't smart enough to want more. I sat in my car outside my sister Dee's house the night the divorce was final, and Dee got in next to me, and I just said, "She beat me, Dee. She finally beat me, and I never even got to play." And my sister, who does my taxes every year because I genuinely cannot keep a receipt in this world, took my hand and said, "Meave, you don't keep score the way she does. That doesn't mean you're losing. It means you're playing a different game." I didn't know what she meant that night. I do now. Here's the thing about how I climbed out. And it's not the climb you're expecting. Because there was no master plan. I'm not a planner. There was no box of evidence, no clever move I'd been saving. There was just a broken-hearted woman who, for the first time in 15 years, finally stopped. I stopped carrying them, not as a strategy, as survival. I just didn't have it in me anymore. I stopped hosting the holidays nobody else would host. I stopped sending the birthday cards and remembering the anniversaries and being the one who smoothed everything over. I stopped being the family's beating heart. Because the family had cut me out, and you can't keep a heart beating for people who've shown you the door. And here's what I didn't expect. The absence had a sound. Because it turns out, when you're the glue, nobody notices the glue until you're gone, and everything quietly comes apart. That first holiday season without me, there was no warm Thanksgiving. Gloria's was as frozen as ever. And worse now, because there was no one there to thaw it. The nieces and nephews didn't get their cards. Birthdays passed unmarked. The family didn't fall apart in a dramatic way. It fell apart the way a garden does when the one person who watered it leaves. Slowly, quietly, brown at the edges. I heard about it sideways, the way you do. Hannah, the niece I'd taught to braid, found me on social media and messaged me, just to say she missed me, that the holidays were weird now, that nobody did the going around the table thing anymore. The nephew I'd poured root beer for called me on his birthday, because, he said, I was the only one who ever remembered it. Little signals, from the people who'd actually loved me, that the warmth had gone out of that house when I did. I didn't gloat about it. It made me sad. Honestly, I'd loved being the heart of something. I just couldn't be the heart of people who'd cut me out. And nobody felt that absence more than Sal. Because I'd been his lifeline. After the heart attack, I was the person who made him feel safe, who treated him like he still mattered, who pulled up a chair. And now I was gone. And what did Sal have? A wife who'd left him alone 3 weeks after he nearly died. A son, too, wrapped up in his new life to visit much. A big quiet house, and a cold dinner table, and a granddaughter he only saw when the custody schedule allowed. I didn't engineer any of that. I want to be so clear about this, because it matters. I didn't withhold my love to teach them a lesson. I just couldn't pour it into people who'd thrown me away. And the emptiness that left behind was nobody's doing but their own. They'd had a fountain in the middle of that family for 15 years, and they'd capped it. And then they stood around wondering why everything had gone dry. Sal started calling me, quietly, on the phone, when Gloria wasn't around. Just to talk. He'd ask about Ruby, and about my work, and sometimes he wouldn't say much at all, and I understood he was lonely, and I was the person who'd always pulled up a chair. I never said a word against Gloria to him. I never tried to recruit him to my side. I just talked to him, the way I always had, because I loved him, and a divorce doesn't change that. Those calls broke my heart a little, every time. There's a particular loneliness in an old man's voice when he's calling his former daughter-in-law, because she's the only person left who treats him like he's still here. He'd tell me about his garden, he still had the tomatoes, and about how the house was too quiet. And once he said, so quietly I almost missed it, you know. Maeve, you took care of me better in 4 months than she did in 50 years. I think about that a lot now. I've got a lot of time to think. I didn't know what to say to that. I just said, you'd have done the same for me, Sal. And he said, no, that's the thing. Most people wouldn't. You did, and in those quiet phone calls, without me ever leading him there, an old man started saying things out loud that he'd kept inside for 50 years. He started seeing his marriage clearly. He started seeing his wife clearly. And he started, I think, getting angry, the slow, deep anger of a gentle man who has finally had enough. I didn't know any of that was building. I swear I didn't. I thought he was just lonely. I thought I was just being kind to a sad old man, the way I'd always been kind, with no idea that kindness was quietly loading something. If you'd told me that whole year of phone calls, that those quiet afternoons on the phone were going to end with Gloria's whole world coming down on a birthday lawn, I'd have laughed at you. I wasn't planning anything. I never plan anything. That's the part Gloria could never have guarded against. You can defend yourself against a schemer. But how do you defend yourself against a woman who's just being nice, with no plan at all? Then came the invitation to the 70th birthday party. It was Sal's party, but Gloria was throwing it 100 guests. The tent, the caterer, a performance of what a wonderful family they were. And I was not invited. Of course I wasn't. I was the cast-off hairdresser. But Sal called me himself. And he said, Maeve, I want you there. And I want Ruby there. Your family, whatever that woman says. And it's my birthday. And I'm asking. And then, quieter, he said something that should have warned me. He said, besides, I've got a few things I want to say, and I'd like you in the room when I say them. I almost didn't go. My sister Dee begged me not to. Why would you walk back into that lion's den, Maeve? You're finally free of them. And she was right. She was completely right. But Sal had asked. And Ruby wanted to see her grandpa. And some stubborn, soft part of me, the part that has never once learned its lesson, couldn't say no to that quiet old man who'd asked me to be in the room. Dee sat me down the night before and tried one more time. She's the practical one, the one who does my taxes, the one who keeps the receipts I lose. She said, Maeve, I love you. But you do this every time. You walk back toward people who hurt you because you can't stand to think someone might be lonely. Gloria is going to be at that party, in her element, with her wine and her friends, and she is going to find a way to make you feel like garbage on her own lawn. "Why are you handing her that?" And I didn't have a good answer. I just said, "Because Sal asked me to be in the room, and in 15 years he's never asked me for one thing." Dee looked at me for a long time, and then she sighed and said, "Then wear the blue dress, and don't drink their wine, and call me the second it gets bad." That's my sister. She couldn't stop me, so she armored me as best she could. I barely slept. I kept rehearsing comebacks I knew I'd never say, the way I always do brilliant, cutting things that evaporate the second I actually need them. I am hopeless in a confrontation. I freeze and I smile and I cry later in the car. I knew, lying there, that if Gloria came at me, I'd have nothing, the way I'd always had nothing. I went anyway. For Sal. For Ruby. For the soft, stupid, stubborn part of me that keeps showing up for people, even after they've shown me exactly who they are. So I put on my sale rack dress, the blue one. Dee and I took my daughter's hand, and I walked back onto that beautiful, poisonous lawn. And for the first hour, it was exactly what I'd braced for. The cold hellos, Gloria's friends giving me the up and down, the same appraisal I'd been failing for 15 years. Mark avoiding my eyes from across the yard. Brittany glittering on his arm, young and sharp, and already, I could tell, a little unhappy. I stayed near the edges, where I've always been most comfortable, and I got Ruby a plate and watched her run off with the other kids. I found Sal in his chair near the roses, and I crouched down and wished him a happy birthday, and his whole tired face lit up the way it used to, and he held my hand and said, "There she is. There's my girl." And for 1 second, the whole horrible afternoon was worth it. And then Gloria found me. She'd had a glass or two of wine, and she was riding high on her own party, the queen surveying her kingdom. She came up to me near the dessert table, where there were people all around, and she gave me that smile, and she said it. Loud enough. On purpose. Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made. And here's the thing, for 1 second, one awful second, I almost believed her. That's what 15 years of a woman like Gloria does to you. It gets inside. Standing there with my paper plate, I felt the old voice start up. Maybe she's right. Maybe you were never enough. Maybe everyone really is better off. That voice was Gloria's. But after 15 years, it sounded like mine. And then I looked across the lawn at my daughter laughing with the other kids, and at Sal in his chair watching me with those kind eyes, and the voice quieted. Just enough. I didn't fire back. I couldn't have if I'd wanted to. I'm not built with a weapon in my mouth. But I also didn't crumble. I just looked at Gloria, this woman who'd spent 15 years pricing me and finding me cheap, and I said, quiet and steady, "You know, Gloria, I hope that's true. I hope he's happy." And I meant it, which I think unsettled her more than any insult could have. Then I said, "Excuse me, I should go check on Ruby." And I set down my plate and I walked away, and I let her have her moment, because I had nothing else to give her, and it turned out I didn't need anything else. I want you to mark the time here, because everything that mattered happened in the next 5 minutes. Minute 1. I walked away from the dessert table toward the tent, blinking hard, trying to find Ruby in the crowd so I could hold her hand and have a reason to leave soon. I remember thinking, just get to the car. Just get through this. You can fall apart later. The way you always do. I had no idea the afternoon was about to turn completely upside down. I thought I was leaving in defeat, the way I'd left every encounter with that woman for 15 years. Minute 2. There was a tinkling sound of fork against a glass, and the crowd started to hush, the way crowds do, turning toward the front, where someone was about to make the birthday toast. I figured it would be Mark, the golden son, saying something charming about his father. Minute 3, but it wasn't Mark who stood up. It was Sal, the quiet man. He got up out of his chair near the roses, slowly, a little unsteady, and he took the microphone the caterer had set up, and 100 people turned to smile at the sweet old birthday boy. Gloria beamed at the front, basking, certain this was going to be another lovely moment in her lovely production. Then something in my stomach dropped, because I suddenly remembered what he'd said to me on the phone. "I've got a few things I want to say, and I'd like you in the room when I say them." I'd thought he meant a sentimental toast. A thank you to his family. Standing there at the edge of that tent, with Ruby's hand in mine, watching this frail, gentle man lift a microphone in front of every important person his wife had ever wanted to impress, I felt the first cold flicker of understanding. He hadn't asked me there to watch him be polite. He'd asked me there to witness something. I just didn't know yet that the something was the truth. Minute 4. Sal looked out at all of us. And he didn't start with a joke or a thank you. He started quiet, the way he started everything, but the lawn went still to hear him. He said, "Thank you all for coming. 70 years. You think, at 70, you've finally figured out what matters. And I have. So I'm going to tell you while I've still got the nerve." And then he found me in the crowd. He looked right at me, holding Ruby's hand at the edge of that tent, and he said, "2 years ago I had a heart attack. Most of you know that. What you don't know is that when I came home from that hospital scared and weak and not sure I'd see another birthday, the person who took care of me wasn't my wife." A ripple went through the crowd. Gloria's smile froze. My wife went to stay at her sister's because the house was too sad. The person who moved in and took care of me, who drove me to every appointment, who sat with me so I wouldn't be afraid, was Maeve, my son's wife. The girl this family decided wasn't good enough for us. You could have heard a pin drop on that grass. Minute 5. And Sal kept going, and his voice got stronger, 50 years of swallowed words coming up all at once. He said, "I've watched this family throw away the best person in it. I've listened for 15 years to my wife call that girl the little adventure, the hairdresser. Like kindness is something you can be too low class for. I watched her work on my son until he believed it. I heard her do it at this very table, in this very house, telling Mark he'd married beneath himself, pushing other women at him, picking that marriage apart a piece at a time until it fell." He turned and looked at his son, who had gone the color of paper. "You didn't fall out of love with your wife, Mark. Your mother talked you out of it. And I was a coward, and I stayed quiet, the way I always stay quiet, and I let it happen. I'm 70 years old today. I'm done being quiet." I stood frozen at the edge of that tent. I could feel 100 faces turning, the way a field of flowers turns toward the light, away from Gloria and toward me. Hannah, the niece, had her hand over her mouth. Mark's stern uncle was nodding slowly, like something he'd suspected for years had just been confirmed. Brittany had let go of Mark's arm and taken a small step away from him, and you could see her doing math behind her eyes, math about what kind of family she'd just signed up for. And Mark himself just stood there, hollowed out, finally hearing in his father's voice the thing he'd spent 15 years refusing to hear in his own. And then Sal looked at Gloria, his wife of 50 years, standing there with her wine and her pearls and her smile, gone to ash in front of every important person she knew. And he said, gently, which somehow made it worse, "You told that girl 20 minutes ago that leaving her was the best decision our son ever made. I heard you. So did half this yard. Gloria, the best thing that ever happened to this family, walked through our door 15 years ago with a pair of scissors and a kind heart. And the worst decision this family ever made was listening to you tell us she was nothing. Nobody clapped. Nobody breathed. 100 people stood on that lawn and watched Gloria Calloway's entire kingdom, built on whispers, run on everybody's politeness, ruled for 50 years by the simple fact that no one ever said the true thing out loud, fall down around her in real time. Because someone finally said the true thing out loud. And it wasn't me. I never said a word. I couldn't have. I'm not built that way. It was the quiet man I'd pulled up a chair for, all those years ago. He kept the only receipt that ever mattered. He kept it in his heart, and on his 70th birthday, he read it out to everyone. And then he set down the microphone, and he walked slow, steady, straight across that lawn, past his wife, past his son, past all of them, to me. And he took my hand the way I'd taken his in all those scary afternoons. And he said, just to me, "Thank you, sweetheart, for all of it." And I finally cried. Not the kind I cry in the car. The other kind. The kind that washes something clean. Let me tell you how it ended. Because the lawn was just the beginning. That party broke the spell. And a spell is exactly what it had been. Once Sal said it out loud, once one person with nothing to gain stood up and named what everyone had quietly known, the whole story that Gloria had built collapsed. You can't run a kingdom on a secret after someone shouts the secret from the front of the tent. Her friends, the ones who'd given me the up and down for 15 years, suddenly remembered they had other places to be. The family she'd controlled with her version of events had just heard a different version, from the one man whose word they couldn't dismiss. Gloria's power had only ever been social. It was the power to decide what the family believed, who was in and who was out, whose story won. And in 5 minutes on a birthday lawn, she lost it. Not in a courtroom, not on paper, in the only place her power ever lived, in what people thought of her. They saw her, finally, and you cannot unsee a woman once you've seen her. The invitation slowed. The phone stopped ringing the way it used to. The committees found other chairwomen. I didn't do any of that to her, and I want to be honest, I didn't even enjoy it the way you'd think. But I won't pretend there wasn't a kind of justice in watching a woman who'd spent her life deciding who counted suddenly find out she'd stopped counting, and that she'd done it to herself, with her own mouth, in front of everyone she'd ever wanted to impress. Mark fell apart. Not that night he just left, white-faced, with Brittany, but in the weeks after, because his father had handed him the one thing he'd been hiding from for 15 years, the knowledge that he hadn't been a man making his own choice. He'd been a boy doing what his mother wanted. Brittany, for the record, did not stick around long once she got a clear look at the family she'd be marrying into. I heard she ended it within a couple of months, and I felt something almost like sympathy for her, because in a way she'd been sold the same lie I had, that the Calloways were something golden, when really they were just cold with good lighting. Mark called me. Eventually, he cried. He said he was sorry, that his father was right, that he didn't know who he'd be if he stood up to his mom, but he was going to try. I listened. I didn't take him back. That bridge had burned, and I had no wish to walk back over it, and besides, I'd finally learned the difference between a man who loves you and a man who lets other people decide what you're worth. But for Ruby's sake, I was glad he was finally trying to become his own person. Some sons take a lifetime to leave their mothers. At least mine had started, and at least his daughter would grow up watching him try. And Sal. Sal and Gloria's marriage didn't survive what he said on that lawn, and at 70 he decided it didn't need to. He'd spent 50 years quiet, and he wasn't going to spend whatever he had left that way. He didn't leave her in a dramatic fashion. He just stopped pretending, and the pretending was the only thing that marriage had ever been. He moved into a little place of his own, with room for a tomato garden, and he started spending real time with Ruby and me. Sunday dinners at my apartment, which were loud and warm and had one more plate at the table, just like my mother's. Ruby taught him a card game, and he let her win. Badly, every single time. He told me once, over coffee with his half spoon of sugar, I should have said it 10 years ago. But I'm glad I got to say it at all. And I held his hand, the way I had in all those scary afternoons, and I told him better late than never is a real thing, and it counts. He got a few good years out of his new freedom. They were, he said, the best ones. We were the family he should have had all along, the one nobody had to be rich or impressive to belong to. As for me, I didn't win anything you could put in a bank. There was no settlement, no payout, no dramatic comeuppance with a dollar sign. I just got my family back, the real ones. The ones who'd loved me all along under Gloria's frost. Hannah comes to me for advice now. The nephew brings his boyfriend to my Sunday dinners. I got Sal. I got the truth, said out loud, in front of everyone. Which is a thing I'd stopped believing I would ever get. And I got to stop, finally, wondering if maybe Gloria had been right about me. Because 100 people heard a good man say she wasn't. And you can't argue with a room full of witnesses, not even inside your own head. So here's what I learned. Standing on that lawn with a paper plate and no comeback, while a quiet man gave me back my whole life. For 15 years, I believed I was losing. Because I was playing against a woman who kept score with money and status and clever words, and I had none of those things. I couldn't out-argue her. I couldn't outmaneuver her. I didn't have a single piece of paper to prove what she'd done. By every rule of her game, I was nothing. And some days I almost believed it. But here is what I know now. And it's the thing I'd give to anyone who's ever felt like the soft one. The one who loses every argument. The one with no proof and no power against someone colder and sharper than they are. The people who keep score with cruelty think kindness is weakness. They think because you can't fight the way they fight, you can't win. But love isn't weak. Showing up isn't weak. And here is the part they never see coming. Every kind thing you do is a receipt. 2, you're not keeping it, but somebody is. Every chair you pull up, every scary afternoon you sit through, every dignity you protect, somebody remembers. And the cold people can control the story right up until the day one of the people you were kind to decides to stand up and tell the truth. For years, I thought my warmth was a liability, the thing that made me a target, the thing Gloria used against me, the soft underbelly that couldn't defend itself. I had it exactly backwards. My warmth wasn't the thing that lost me the war. It was the thing that won it. 3 years late, on a lawn, out of a microphone I never touched. Gloria spent 50 years collecting power and lost it in 5 minutes. I spent 15 years collecting nothing but goodwill. And it turned out goodwill was the only currency that could buy what I actually wanted to be seen and believed and chosen in front of everyone. So if you're the soft one, hear me. You don't have to become hard to win. You don't have to learn to fight dirty or keep a file or turn into the very thing that hurt you. You just have to keep being the kind of person worth standing up for. And trust that the quiet ones are watching. Because they are. And then, when you least expect it, when you've got nothing in your hands but a paper plate and a broken heart, somebody stands up. The quiet ones were watching the whole time. And love, it turns out, keeps better records than cruelty ever could. Thank you for sitting with me through all of it. If this reminded you of someone, a person who gave everything and got called nothing, who loved a family that tried to throw them away, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been the soft one? The one with no proof who finally had somebody stand up for them when they least expected it? I read every single one. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.